So, hello and welcome to another episode of Project Peak Performance. Today, we are going to debate how the Eastern and Western world approach many things, such as life, relationships, and business. And we're going to try and link it to our fantastic 8 dimensions of peak performance. So, joining me today on the pod is Rob, James, and Ian. Hello, guys. How are we doing?
Hello.
Very good.
So we're going to be quite ruthless with it today. We're going to go through 8 questions and we're going to cap each set of answers to 5 minutes. So I'm going to be a bit authoritarian today, I think. Let's give it a go. So the first question links to our first dimension of peak performance, vitality and well-being. So the question is, how do Eastern and Western cultures differ in their approach to fitness? And what impact does this have on an individual's well-being in those cultures? Who's going to go first?
I can jump in on
Gosh.
fitness and well-being. I think they're both massive, aren't they? So we're kind of talking about the medium when we're talking about these, because there's circumstances outside of, like England is very different to Italy, to the US, etc. But typically speaking, from the research, from reading into things, I'm super interested in the Japanese culture, actually. So I'm going to sort of relate a lot of it to that. The sort of stereotypical Western vibe would be to be more focused on appearance and sort of gym related activity, whereas the well-being really kind of from an Eastern vibe seems to be more focused on sort of mental clarity and getting in touch with yourself and being more driven around kind of how you feel rather than how you look, was kind of my research. I don't know if you guys sort of got the same view, the same vibe.
Yeah, I think it's it's a lot more sort of health focused than how you feel. I think you're right. I think in the Western world, it's chasing how others perceive you and the muscles and the youthful look. Whereas in the Eastern cultures, it's there's beauty in age and wisdom and things like that. So I definitely would agree with that. Rob, James, any?
It's an interesting one, probably slightly more controversial than whether it's muscles versus mind. It's the Western culture is very much aesthetic based, so therefore, fillers and Botox and all that sort of stuff is far more popular. Whereas obviously in Eastern culture, it's all about the inside and how they can. I suppose it's prevention over cure. In the Western society, it's very much how can I cure how I'm feeling, whereas there it's preventing feeling a certain way and the various herbs and elixirs and all this sort of stuff that they consume to make themselves feel good from the inside. And from a Western perspective, I think we've got a more of a culture of making ourselves feel better from the outside.
Mm, yeah.
And mobility as well. I think mobility is something that even to the latter age bracket, mobility is something that's much more focused in the Eastern culture, whereas we're more driven by personal bests and kind of really trying to push the boundaries, whether we're a swimmer, a gym rat, a runner, a cyclist, we're always trying to strive for the next best time. Whereas it does feel that a lot more mobility and even around in England, you can often see kind of Eastern cultures going out for family walks together, after meals and things like that, which even if they're not stood next to each other, which they're not normally, I don't know if anyone else has noticed that, there's normally like one person in the front and they're almost like in a weird single file line of different distance, but they're still out together. They may not be communicating, but they're just going for a walk. Whereas we seem to be a little bit different. That's kind of the take I got in it. Rob?
I would say more like the lean mass of Eastern style culture rather than like body build mass. You know what I mean? If you look at, like, I don't know who said it. I watched a video the other day and someone said, like, you can't be fit if you lift a load of weights, you still can't be fit if you can't even run 5K. Like, so if you look at the sort of more Eastern side to it, going back to what we were saying about muscle mass and stuff like that, I feel like they're not necessarily, it's more about the density of the muscle rather than it just being I'm bulked out and that's seen as fitness, which is I think sometimes a bit crazy. So I feel like, you know, that part tends to lend towards it, and I think it's more of a holistic view on it. You don't necessarily go to drive 10 miles down the road to go to a gym to run on a treadmill. In a lot of those societies, you just go out running in where you are locally. Or actually, really, when you look at it, our part to it, you know, from a fitness side, we live quite a sedated life. You know what I mean? Like, we sit here in front of our cameras, we sit on our chairs in our offices, etc. Whereas a lot of the society out there is their fitness is in their everyday movement of, like, you know, doing the everyday tasks and that element to it. So I don't know, you find that whole different variance on it.
Mm.
Fascinating. Well, we're coming to the end of that first cycle. So if we move into optimal environments, so we're sort of linking into the family dynamics now. So what are the key distinctions between Eastern and Western cultures, and how do these influence relationships? Anyone want to pick this up as a starting point?
I just wanted to add an observation, and I think this is going to cover almost all of the dimensions in some way, shape, or form. Eastern culture has much more, in my opinion, from the research I did and from what I've learned, a much more of a community-focused approach to their lives and the way they exist. Whereas I feel like there's a bit more of an individualistic approach to Western society. You know, and that was one thing that really stood out in so much of what I read and what I've watched, is that everything is about community. The you know, a lot of gatherings around when they eat, that becomes an event where they're all together. You know, exercise, like Ian said, after a meal, where they'll all go as a community. So I think from a Western perspective, there's a lot we could learn, because I think there's a lot of loneliness and a lot of depression and a lot of unhappiness in Western society. And then when you look at Eastern communities, they've got these little tribes that gather together, whether they're family or not.
Yeah,
Real
I,
community.
I think that strand goes through everywhere. So I saw a lot on community emphasis, team over individual. If you look at sort of even, you know, the Japanese football team, they go to tournaments, you know, the whole respect they have around together as a team, cleaning the changing room that they've just been in, and, you know, the fans cleaning away the rubbish in the stands. It's all about sort of not putting yourself first. It's about doing the right thing and doing it together. Everyone's on that sort of even keel. So yeah, that shone out massively from the research. Rob, sorry, were you about to come in then?
no, I was about to say, like, when you just leading on from that, if you think about from us as a Western society towards our family circle, I don't know, for me personally, I don't necessarily have the same relationships as with my cousins and my aunties and my uncles, as like my best friend's Hindu. And, you know, their relationships with their auntie and uncles is very much deeper ingrained. Like you're saying on that, it's like you tend to find that in maybe Western society, the house is the people, it's like the parents and the children, might be grandparents, and that's really it. But you tend to find that, I don't know, it's a bit of a weird one. When I first went and met him and started to see him, you had a lot more of like aunties and uncles like appear all the time. You're like, Jesus, this is a
It's
different.
it's a great point. I was my best mate, and, you know, our best man at his wedding. He was best man at my wedding. Is Sikh, and just the sort of the build up to like big events and the amount of people that turn up. I think I did my best man speech in front of 500 people at Epsom Racecourse, and it was, you know, just everyone there, and the way they bring like myself into that community as well. It was just you know, a really open environment. Everyone's welcome. Everyone's on the same, you know, wavelength, so to speak.
And what's quite nice with it, I just want to jump in on, especially on that point as well. Like, when it comes to death in the family environments, like they actually go back to the origins of their actual village, of where they actually originally came from in India, and they will give money to the local church and go and see the families of the descendants out there, etc. So like, it's real grassroots side to it. You think about it. For my part, like, I don't necessarily know where my granddad's granddad came from. Like, but with them, it's like it's an evolution of, like, remember where your origins were. You might be on the other side of the world, but we're still going to give back to actually where you originally came from, the communities that exist there.
Has anyone done the research into where that comes from? Where was the first sort of, you know, seeds of community culture? Why it is that way versus what we might see sort of more in the Western world of, you know, a bit more of a closed door approach and look after your own and yourself?
I think community is a word that you can use for it, but I think what I found on this is a lot more hierarchy involved in the Eastern culture. I don't think it's as free and as fair maybe as what we've got in the Western culture. There's a lot more rules in play, and gender roles as an example, you know, very different in how we live in the Western culture these days to how the gender roles play a part in the Eastern culture. You know, it's very stereotypical over there still in terms of breadwinner versus home carer. And I think that's something which hasn't evolved over there. But I think that is because I don't think community is the right word for it, actually. I think it's more the social obligation that you have to live in a certain way. You know, the hierarchy is very, very different. The respect level is very different, granted. And I think that we can learn a lot in the Western culture for how they respect people and teachers and levels of authority. But I also think in terms of how we live our lives over here in 2024, especially with gender roles and the way that families are and the way that we teach, very, very different. We would see it as archaic in
I mean,
how that life is lived over there.
would we say, before we move on to the next one, would we say then, if we were looking at you know, we're not doing a scoring system today on East versus West, but is the environment, the family dynamic, the upbringing, is that more of an even playing field? Take a bit from West, take a bit from East, and
I
happy middle?
think with the ideology of some of the Eastern cultures towards Western, I think some ideology, but what Ian was saying there, some of maybe the archaic rules around like hierarchies needs to maybe be adjusted on their part. But obviously, then again, like if you adjust it, what happens to their society? But I always felt like the a bit like, you know, if you take on a view of like a Buddhist view, you can take on the ideology of it, but not necessarily actually be a full Buddhist.
I think we can build on this part of the dimension we've just discussed, which was optimal environment, if we go on to learning and growth. So if we look at education, how do Eastern and Western philosophies shape the learning experiences and outcomes for individual? I think that's a nice next step. So anyone want to pick that one up?
I looked when I was looking into the teaching habits, so learning at child level rather than necessarily learning after schooling. It was pretty clear that Western is more based around creativity. There's a lot more creativity involved in it. Interest of choice as well. You know, if you get to, I don't know what age we choose what we do, but something around 12, you get to pick a language. You kind of around that kind of 14. And then when you get to 16, you get to pick your A levels. But even at GCSE level, you still get a choice of which ones you want to choose, you know, which is 13, 14 years old. So there's a lot more creativity and choice involved in what we enjoy and what we want to do. Because at 14, you're picking a GCSE because you enjoy it. Yeah. I'm picking PE because I want to do PE. You know, that's how we pick it. I pick geography over history, you know, whatever it may be, because it's what we enjoy. Whereas the schooling system in the Eastern appears to be a lot more around the struggle and the challenge of something that you find difficult is the learning. So you do the stuff that you find hard and you do the stuff that you enjoy less, because that is the learning path that you're going on. You're not learning about history, you're learning about the challenge of learning about history in a kind of deeper level. And there's also a lot more focus in Eastern about being top of the class as well, which we've kind of moved away from the whole, you get a medal if you finish 9th, whereas they're much more top of the class is a stature, it's a respect level. The family take pride in having a child at the top of the class, whereas the Western culture seems to be more driven now around don't celebrate top, celebrate taking part. That's the difference I could see in the schooling system.
Well, it's quite often you see sort of child prodigies, whether it's sort of, you know, a violinist, a pianist, a spelling bee champion, you know, from sort of Eastern cultures, and that would probably come from that repetition and that learning and honing that skill. I mean, just if we look at sort of the Western side of things. I mean, Rob, James, do you have a, do you have anything sort of to come in from the Western side about that, or are any more thoughts on this subject of learning and growth?
I find it hard to argue. So when I listened to the way Ian just articulated what he shared, the thing I really respect about Eastern culture is that they accept that life isn't easy, and so therefore they accept that to excel, everyone having equal opportunity and each getting a medal for finishing first or 15th in the sprint, it's not right for producing the right mindset for an adult, because that's not life. Life isn't fair. So I think the Eastern for me in this scenario, if we were doing a versus, the Eastern for me does win through, because I do agree with the philosophy of, if you do the hard things that you don't enjoy so much, then you're going to develop discipline. I think Western culture has developed a learning system where people will do things when they're motivated, not through the act of discipline.
There's obviously a sense that a lot of sort of teenagers, I suppose, come from the Eastern world into the Western system at sort of university age, degree age, post degree age. So why do you think that would be? Is it that they finally get to the point where they do crave a bit of freedom and they see that what they can do in a different culture, or it's an interesting concept, I think.
I think it's probably recognition. Sorry, Rob, I know that you give me your spot. I think it's probably recognition, because Western society seems to dominate the worldview, right? Through press, so if you're a high achieving Chinese pupil, Japanese pupil, West Eastern pupil, if you come over to the UK and go to Oxford or Cambridge, or you go over to the US and you go to MIT or wherever else, your ability to shape the world is greater, because the recognition of the way the Western schooling system seems to operate has a greater platform. Rightly or wrongly, it has a great.
Good shot. Rob?
I think that exactly what you were saying there, though, James. I think universities are set up more in the Western cultures for specific subjects, and those universities enable you to get into higher performing jobs and more earning power than you would maybe in sort of the Eastern world. I think there is a part, though, of the scarcity of, well, not scarcity, but like the expectation from families on Eastern parents in saying you must go off and become a doctor, you must go off and do this. So I think there's an element, obviously, of like what you're saying, Ian, at the beginning about learning through challenges, but I feel like there's quite a lot of expectation on children to then be those prodigies and go off to university and travel over there and earn us the money, become the doctors and the, like the solicitors or whatever it might be out there, rather than actually just being like, go and find what you want to do.
There's a balance, isn't there, between commitment and saying you're going to do something and committing to it. I'm going to be a doctor, and then you commit all the way through to become the doctor, versus finding and exploring what you're going to want to enjoy doing. And I think there's a big grey area on this part. What is right is forging that life that you deem as successful in your perspective, correct, versus living freely and being happy, and not to say someone's happier than the other, but kind of finding at 31 years old that you've just found the career you're going to do. Maybe that makes you have the happiest life that you could possibly have. So it's real core, and you've always got the top 2 or 3% in each area that you could deem as success in its own right. I think you have to then look at the middle 60% to make that decision on what suits you personally. Because as we go through these, I look at the fitness one and think I would be more suited to the Eastern vibe. Then I look at the family sort of relationship stuff. As a dad with 2 young daughters, I would never want them to be raised in that culture, not in a million years. And then you look at the kind of the learning and the education system, and I think I'd actually prefer my kids to go through the schooling system up to 18, learning more about respect, challenge, commitment, ticking all the boxes, not just being good at one subject. I would rather them learn that foundation level. So it's interesting because I always relate it back. How would I want my kids to be brought up? So far, I'm kind of 2 for 1, but it's quite interesting to look at it that way.
I think I was looking at the different dimensions there, thinking, oh, where are we going to go next? Because there was a nice lead into a few there. But if we go into purposeful achievement, so how do Eastern and Western societies view the process of learning, and how does this influence approaches to skill acquisition and knowledge transfer? I think that's a nice next phase. Who wants to go on that one, guys?
I think we've touched on it. Sorry, Ian.
I was just going to say, I found this quite interesting, not learning, but like I was looking into design and how people, how websites differ and adverts differ, and even like movies and things like that. You know, I think there was an example of Rambo versus Rambo. Rambo Western, Rambo kind of in Asian culture, and very, very different look. Websites are created very differently. There's a lot more information consumed in a website in an Eastern culture, whereas we're much more simple. Even down to the point of, they were showing the example of a Western group of people just articulating what they could see in a picture. So if we imagined Rob was a picture on the Zoom call, don't move, Rob, you're not allowed to move for like the next 60 seconds. Then in Eastern culture, if they were describing that, they would say, we can see a room with certain color background, with medals, with some awards on the window, a bookcase in the back. We can see that there's a radiator in the room. Whereas in Western, they would say, I see a guy with earrings, with stubble. So in Western, we would describe the focal point being Rob, whereas in Eastern, they would get to Rob last. They would describe what isn't around, and then we see a man with brown hair, with earrings, and blah, 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 and they would describe him last. So it's quite interesting, just the read on things are slightly different. And I, no right or wrong, just I found it interesting.
But does that feed through their, what am I trying to say here? When you look at the way they run their businesses, when you read, about things like Ikigai, and you read about Toyota's principles and the way in which they ran business, or they run business rather, does that not feed through that? They're always looking at the bigger picture before they focus in on the finite detail. Whereas I think Western civilization has a tendency to focus on one thing and obsess over that one thing, and then the rest of it might or might not happen.
Yeah, and I think we'll see the same thing when we touch on diet as well. Same thing on the plate. You know, it's very interesting. But yeah, that was baffling. They did a test actually as well. Had hexagons all around another hexagon, which was embossed. And for me, I looked at it and it looked like the hexagon in the middle was sat inside, whereas someone reading it from a Western point of view thought that it was sat pointing outwards. It was 3D, whereas I thought it was inverted. They thought it was outverted. And that's just because we read left to right versus right to left, just how we saw the hexagon popping out. So it's amazing, really, like how these foundations of habits have an impact on how you see life perspective.
I think as well, we've spoken a lot about in the East that sort of, maybe rigid way of learning and sort of repetition and things like that. One of the traits that I see quite regularly when I look at elite performers is adaptability. And I'd love to know how that translated into sort of Eastern culture, and whether through the way they learn and how they come up, we've spoken about actually it's not the easy things they enjoy all the time, and therefore they have to get used to it. But I wonder if there's in the West, there's more adaptability of people, experiencing different things or trying things a different way. And that creative urge that we spoke about a bit earlier, that's probably an open question that I wonder and would like to know more about.
Do you think it's adaptability or opportunity?
Yeah, interesting.
Go on.
Well, you're saying in Western, you've got that adaptability because you can, but do you think there's just more opportunity, more freedom to be able to,
there's
rather
more
than adapt?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, it's still a trait that if you're comparing and you put two people in a situation out of their control, who's going to adapt better? I mean, that's what I'd look at it as. But yeah,
It's an interesting viewpoint, because if you look at quite a lot of Eastern culture rather, especially when you look at how certain cultures are very ingrained in the martial arts, and they're very, and if you look at Buddhism, it's very mind over matter. So would someone that has gone through that process of that disciplined control of the mind, despite them being in a culture where it's more regimented and systemized, would they be better to react in an environment where it's against the grain than someone in Western culture who hasn't had that same mind control discipline?
Do you know
Then
how to flow on that, James? Because a great point is topical, and just while it's top of my mind, the Olympics, first and second, US and China, always US and China. So we've got the perfect case study here. If you take anything explosive, speed based, US win the gold.
Every
Anything
time.
that's disciplined and like gymnastics or something like that, China win the gold. It's quite interesting that if it's based on what we were talking about back on physical stuff, building muscle, building strength, speed, that element of things, swimming, etc., US win. Technical, China win. Table tennis, badminton, boom, 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 smashed.
if we look at sport in another sense, there's a phenomenal boxer. He's dominant in his weight class, often talks about pound for pound, number one, Inui. He every single fight he's ever had has been in Japan. So he has it on his turf, on his terms, and people come over into that environment and don't lay like a hand on him. He's never really been tested, but that's because he's so bloody good. And he knows everything around like what his next move, his next punch, and he just destroys people. I'd love to see how he did in a different country, and I'm sure he'd still do well, but I wonder why he hasn't gone over and taken the money in America, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like Rob's into martial arts, same as me. You got one, versus UFC, and it's very difficult to kind of say which one has got the better fighters because the UFC is just better promoted to us. So through our eyes, we see the UFC. Which someone was mentioning about it before. We see what we see, but they see what they see as well. So what's marketed and what's in your channel of engagement has an impact to what we view and what we perceive. But I don't know. You see a lot of these fighters come over to the UFC. Some of them win, some of them lose. I think it's probably more balanced than people may see.
If we move on to mind mastery, so we touch on mindset. So what role does mindset play in Eastern and Western cultures, and how does it impact personal and professional development? Who wants to take that one, guys?
I've got such an unbalanced view on this that I probably will hold back.
Go for it. That's what we want, James.
You've intrigued us, mate. Go on.
Yeah.
I'm open to being wrong here, but I just think Eastern society and culture tramples all over Western when it comes to mindset, mind mastery, being at one with the inner calm. I just can't see an argument that suggests that Western gets anywhere near Eastern when it comes to the mastery of the mind.
I think from a consistent perspective, a base level, I can definitely, I doubt that there's any other argument to it. I suppose you do obviously have anomalies in any culture. So from a Western world, if you were to put your top five against your top five, you've got the Westerners who immerse themselves deeply and would give anyone a play for it. But yeah, no, I think from a consistent basis, absolutely.
If you're generalizing, like Ian said, you always have your top 5 or 10%, but if we were looking at the 60%, Eastern society and the way in which they live their lives and everything else, because it's much more holistic. They're more about mind, body, and soul, whereas I think Western is very body focused, and mind and soul might feature, it might not.
Rob, Ian, what do you think?
I'm letting Rob go because the mind is Rob's bag.
It's 100% true though, because you think about the cultural elements to it all, like how they're brought up, how they're crafted their minds, then they're taught meditation, breath work, all of the origins that we now are getting involved more and more within the Western societies after Western society approach to it, medication, alcohol, drugs, don't sleep more than 5 hours or anything like that. You know what I mean? So like any time you ever look at anyone adapting from the Western society, it tends to be Eastern cultures they're homing themselves back in on, aren't they? So
does sort of meditation, breath work, all of that stuff, does that come through from an early age? Is that stuff that's practiced in schools and kids are doing it? a lot of I heard someone speaking yesterday that when sort of certainly in a Japanese culture, people get to later life, they often find their second childhood where they can enjoy things more, and they maybe have their purpose a little bit more set than what they thought they were going to do when they're younger, so they enjoy that mindfulness more. Is that through life?
I do think that there's some elements to it. Like if you look in the early stages of schooling, like Ian was saying, it's like it's not just our route where it's like maths, English, science. Like there's elements within the educational system out there that is towards the fitness elements, which naturally, if you are doing more yoga based practices at a younger age outdoors as a part of one of your schooling lessons, that will engage your breath work as well, because they are a bit more mindfulness towards the like intrinsic basics of it, like the foundations of where it came from, and also the foundations towards if you're doing yoga, this is how you breathe when you do yoga.
It's a fascinating point, because my eldest boy is 6 years old. He's in school, and they get to opt into after school clubs, and generally it's it's football, it's tennis, it's all of that stuff. And I saw just for this term they put something in for mindfulness, so there was a mindfulness group for primary school kids. So like obviously being the way I am, sort of 100%, and it was undersubscribed, and therefore they couldn't go ahead with it after the first couple of weeks. And it was amazing, because that mindset of, I bet a lot of parents thinking, Jesus, why am I going to do that? What does that entail? Whereas I was like, what a great idea.
From a societal standpoint, though, it's almost like a lot of people would look at the way in which Eastern culture look after the mind, look after the soul, look after themselves is almost described as a bit woo-woo. Almost be labelled that. I've met people recently, I've done things recently. Me and Hayley went to a retreat where there was breath work involved and mindfulness meditations and gongs and so on. And the amount of people, my in-laws, and that's very woo-woo. Why are you wasting your time? And it's such a small-minded, in my opinion, such a small-minded view.
Yeah.
That you can look at a whole society of people who the stats suggest, whether they're swayed or skewed or not, but the stats suggest they're a much healthier of mind society than the Western society is.
Even just some basic stuff. I remember, like, not to go too much off the fitness elements to it, but I remember when I was chatting to Ian about what's the fundamental thing about helping and supporting your running, and Ian, you said yoga. You know what I mean? There's a flexibility elements to it. I've certainly started to adopt that, and I've seen massive changes in how my running performance and my recovery is. And off the back of me starting to do more breath work, I found I'm speeding up my performance. With going back to peak performance, like I'm finding that I'm actually running faster, smoother, easier. My recovery is better, all from learning how to breathe better. But like you said, James, people go, when you talk about breath work, it's like,
woo-woo.
Yeah, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. But because it doesn't fit into the way in which the media dynamic serves Western society, right? It doesn't fit.
100%. 100%. Like if you look at it, like
more money, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and so on.
Yeah, like sit there to turn around and say to someone, like, if you do proper breath work and you breathe through your nose and you increase your oxygen into your blood by like 20% in some cases, like that's free. So like someone, of course, they're going to go, yeah, that's a load of woo woo. But if you want to do this, here's an inhaler or whatever it might be. That's going to.
Here's a question. Then, do you think that if you were to, I know we're not near the end yet, but this is a question that sprung to mind. I want to share it while it's there. Do you think that Western society is geared more towards short-term, quick fix, easy result, and Eastern culture, just from birth throughout, is more geared towards long-term discipline, delayed gratification, because the bigger picture serves you better?
100%.
Yeah. I think it's built around happiness and respect, and socially the difference between, if you took a negative on it, socially in Western it's around guilt, whereas I think socially in Eastern it's around shame. And that plays a deeper part from within as well, where you kind of you probably hurt more from guilt than you would do from shame. Shame's horrible, but you can brush shame off and kind of bring a result. But if you feel guilty, hurts inside, doesn't it? So I think there's a big difference there on happiness for sure.
I think there's a lot more sort of awareness that seems to be around sort of meditation and mindfulness and things like that than maybe there was in years gone by. How many, like, do you think we could ever, as a Western society, embrace that and that become part of our culture? And if so, how many generations do you think it would need to skip for that to happen?
I think it's coming. I think more. But what the difference is not balance. What we're not using it in the right. The ends are increasing. The phone use, the social dynamic, social media, the ability to kind of see what other people think of you is increasing in a negative way. So to combat that, we're trying to bring this Eastern culture in as a fix. But the actual core substance in the middle, I don't think will ever happen because both ends continue to expand.
And moving further away from each other.
And it needs to be more aligned in the middle and not end to end. And that's why we have, the death rate, and that's why we have the stress levels, and that's why we have the mental health issues and the dietary problems and the medical issues, is because the extremes become more extreme.
I think there was a point, I think we've touched on sort of the energizing recreation point around contrasting perspectives on health and wellness. I think it'd be good just to focus quickly on nutritional differences, because I think, I read a lot around, I read the Ikigai book, and you read a lot about it in many parts of sort of the Eastern world. They learn how to sort of stop at 80%. So they'll have a meal, they'll stop at.
Is that what it's called? Harry Batchu, or is that what it's called? That's the whole principle of stopping once you're 80% full. And
yeah, so it's almost like a respect thing of not eating to excess and overindulging. Whereas I think obviously, that's completely alien to a lot of countries in the Western world. So if we looked at the nutritional angles, any further comments on that? Because I find it fascinating.
I wanted to quickly jump in here because I was quickly just researching whilst you were chatting about the Blue Zones not Netflix documentary.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about, Ian was talking about, like, well, Alex, you asked, can they be changed? And there was like out in America, and there's like a highway between like one area of the population and another area of the population. There's this massive highway, and there's like a blue zone that they've created in that, all based around more vegetarian-based diet, a more holistic way to live in, communities, walking everywhere and stuff like that. And they've actually been monitoring over the last few years the difference in the longevity of those individuals and how much healthy they are compared to, and it's like so polar opposite. And you think about from a greater environment perspective, they still receive the same sun, they still got the wind, they still get the same environments from weather perspectives. Pollution of that area is still some determinating factor to it, but how they actually are, what they're putting in their body, how they're moving their body it's massive contrasting actually, of like literally by one road.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. I'm a big believer that, what you put in your body is what you become. And the biology states that, doesn't it? You can go through the list of your organs, your bones, your teeth being the last thing, but your liver, I think your liver is totally different within 5 weeks. Every cell is totally different in your liver within 5 weeks. So what you consume, in natural light, in movement, getting the body moving, in the blood flow going, oxygen, and when you balance that with dietary stuff and nutrition, makes a big difference. And when I was looking into it, this was the best way that it was described for me, is meat in an Eastern culture is just a staple, a part of the meal. It's part of the nutrition balance that meat goes in. Whereas typically in the Western, it's the showpiece and everything else fits around it.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite interesting because you look at the difference in plate sizes, meal sizes. Very obvious that it's a lot bigger in the Western element, but the actual meat is the showpiece, is the bit, and then everything else fits around it.
Yeah.
Whereas for things like veg and nutrition and stuff like that, that's more 3 times what the meat size is. The balance is skewed in a like 3x one way or the other, which was quite interesting as well.
I'm going for a nice big juicy steak on Thursday, so I might take a picture of my plate just to prove the point.
There's the point, right? Nothing on that plate gets mentioned other than that big juicy steak.
What are you guys doing here? Get off. Give me the steak.
Same thing though. Same thing when we're obviously doing this 72-hour fast, you know, in the project, in the group, which has been amazing to watch the engagement in the group. Mrs. was saying to me, "What do you want on Valentine's Day for your food?" And I was like, "I want a big steak. I want a big steak with home cooked chips and sauce." And that also plays a part, is what goes with it: seasoning versus sauces and ketchups and stuff like that versus seasoning. Drastically different in
and
the
again,
herbs, spices, like massive variance, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you know, I have to keep checking like with my kids the meals they're having, because it's plain pasta. Can I have ketchup with that? It's like the most ridiculous things that don't go with ketchup. Ketchup has to be close by, and I'm trying to pull them away from that. It just doesn't need to be the case.
I'd say like if you look at like Indian, I'm just looking at the stats for Indian culture. They reckon between sort of 20 and 30% of Indians now, population is vegetarian. Like when you look at that size to it, and then when you look at our if you come over to more like the Western style culture, you know, like I don't know, some of them are 10% of UK is vegetarian.
If we're being honest, then, and
States 4.2.
If we're being honest, and I'll come to each of you, if you were having to choose one takeaway meal, to have your last takeaway, what would you be choosing, James?
Probably pizza.
Pizza. Ian?
I'm a big fan of a curry. So
Okay.
yeah, I'd have a big curry, you know, with the naan bread, with the poppadoms, with the onion bhaji to start, tikka, big curry. And
this was such a bad question, given that we're going
Terrible.
through it fast.
Yeah,
Sorry.
awful. Yeah, I'm
Rob?
salivating over here now.
For me, it would be proper Mexican style tacos.
Yeah, good news.
Okay, that's a great shout.
Yeah.
To be fair, too many to mention, but if I had a gun to the head, I'd have to go Domino's. Bad.
See, I'm just with you. Yeah.
Again, there is an element of like that's you wouldn't have a Domino's every single day.
True.
Wouldn't
Very
you?
true.
It's not like it's our normal staple diet. And I think like when you look at that part to it, like they do look at the medical side to it. A lot of the reason why we have more bowel problems in Western society is purely because of the consumption of meat that we have.
No, I think it's a treat. If you were talking about a staple diet, then all day long, rice dishes, noodle dishes. As I said, my best mate Seek, his mum, the meals like
phenomenal, aren't they?
Just to roll into sort of little breads and flatbreads and stuff, phenomenal. Okay,
guys. Sorry, that goes back to the whole community element to it. Reversing the way back at the beginning, like you sit down and like the meals are, you know, it's a cooking, it's an experience. It's like it's a longevity. People get involved within that part to it. So it's not like it's like Alex was saying, I'd going for a restaurant for my steak. It would be like the family would be getting together and doing that meal.
There's almost like the closest sort of Western country to that Eastern world then is probably the Spanish with their tapas meals. That's probably
Italy's got a massive blue zone.
Italians as well. Standpoint.
Okay.
See a great. Leave it on a good one. Like even just the Italians, there was on the Blue Zones documentary. I said to the guy, was like, what's your success to your longevity of living over 100? And he said he pulled out his bottle of wine and he was like this. And he said it is because he used to walk down the hills to a little thing, have a glass of wine, come back and have his little siesta. Wow. But he said so like that's my idle life.
I've got to say, I'm biting my lip here, but we need to do another episode, meat versus no meat.
Oh,
because I'm about to destroy some people on the meat front. So I'm just going to leave it for another time.
Before we arrange that, I'm just going to quickly, because I just want the 8th dimension covered, which is empowering relationships. So it's Valentine's Day tomorrow. So we're coming into that, not when this is released, obviously, but exploring relationships. What cultural nuances contribute to varying perspectives on love, friendships, and partnerships in the East and West? Has anyone got a sort of little snippet on empowering relationships?
I just felt when I looked at this, I was really torn. I didn't know, because you've got extremes in everything and then you've got the mediums. And this is the one dimension that has got no cultural relevance, I don't think. The relationship is built on the two individuals. Whether they're brought up in A or B is based on, yes, they get some of their core values and things like that from their upbringing. But at heart, being a person is being a person. And the relationship you have with someone, be it an unhappy one or a happy one, is dictated by your actions and how you interact with each other. And I don't actually think we can say one or the other is a certain way. And we spoke about gender roles and society obligations and events and community and stuff like that. But it's so different, from, we're in different parts of the country. It's different for the four of us in the schooling system, in relationships. It's just in where we are, and we're in a small island called England. It's mental. But I don't actually think, my view, when I really, really looked into it, because I was trying to find an A or a B, but I couldn't. It just came down to people. People are people, and the relationships. Whether you're Western and you shake hands with someone the first time you meet them, or whether you're Eastern and you supply with a bow and you give them a business card as a way of introducing yourself and you don't touch, it doesn't matter. The relationship you have with the person after that is the relationship that you grow, build, and develop, your time, your commitment. And I don't think it matters which culture you're in, really.
Nice.
Is there any counter debate to that bombshell? Because I think that encapsulates it.
I think we'll leave it at that, to be fair.
I'm
Unless,
gonna
go on, Rob.
business wise, they do say that Eastern cultures have longevity in longer periods of sustained business with each other. So going back to that short term adaptability, something like that, it's easy. Like the research I did was like more like Western, we're easy to cut someone off, go right, we're not doing business with them. Within the Eastern society and business, it tends to be seen like a deeper level to that they come to some sort of resolution and understanding towards it, rather than cutting out that relationship quite early on. So
I think if you bring that back to the schooling, patience.
Yeah.
Patience is taught in Eastern culture in the schooling system. Take your time and get there. And it doesn't surprise me. I pulled up the data. It's not Eastern versus Western, but it's just in ethnic groups of death rate, expected death rate, just touching on nutrition, well-being, everything, it comes down to. But 70.8 years of age for Black people, 76.4 years of age for white people, 77.7 years of age for Hispanic people, and with the highest Asian people, 83.5 years expected death rate. So that, in its own right, in terms of living longer for a sort of typified ethnic group of Asian, is outliving a Black culture by 13 years. 13 years. Imagine if you could have 13 years of your life extra.
Imagine,
I don't know what that means, but
what a beautiful pause for thought moment that was, though. I think we all looked up to the sky and thought, imagine what that would be like.
Either that, or we're half of us are dying still on this fasting that we're doing at the moment.
We're gonna do it. Not long left, guys.
Can I ask a question, Alex, just for everyone? Just team Arnold Schwarzenegger or team Jackie Chan? Can we just do that? Like, what should we just purely based on those two individuals for no reason other than? Sorry,
Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee?
Bruce Lee.
Bruce Lee. Sorry, Bruce Lee. Yeah. Let's go, Bruce Lee.
I was about to cut me Rush Hour, great film. Go on. Who's going first? Ian, are you waiting until last then?
Yeah, so, I don't know. I'm torn.
I'll start off Bruce Lee, because I love a quote and I love a Bruce Lee quote.
James?
I'm probably, if I had to flip the coin and it landed one way, it's going to be Bruce Lee.
Ian?
I'm After watching the Arnie documentary, like
It's
I just think the
brilliant, isn't it?
mindset is unbelievable. What he's achieved, the different variety of things he's gone into. So I'll probably go Arnie, to be honest.
I'd probably make it to all because I agree. The documentary, that guy is brilliant. He's got his own quotes as well. But I know more about him probably than Bruce Lee, so it's probably not a fair fight. But we'll have to end with a draw then.
I
2-2.
don't think it wouldn't be a fair fight between the two of them, that's for sure. But yeah,
Bruce Lee would pull him all over the place.
yeah, for sure.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for your time and thoughts. I thought that was brilliant debating through that. So this has been another episode of Project Peak Performance. I hope everyone that listens enjoys it as much as we enjoyed recording it. I would just say that if you get a chance and you're not following us, go and follow the Facebook group, subscribe to the podcast. You can see us on YouTube as well if you're a bit more of a visual learner. But yeah, thanks for your time for those that have listened. Anything else from anyone else?
Next week we've got Superman that we're interviewing on his 7th marathon run, isn't it? 7th? After his 7th?
Me.
Don't
I
be
was
so
like, I
negative.
love
tune in.
Superman. Which Superman are we getting on? I
Tune
love
in
Superman.
Whilst Aaron's, whilst he's like between, what is it, between 7th or 8th marathon?
Yeah, 8 on Sunday.
Yeah, so it'd be 8th on Sunday, so it'd be between the 8th and 9th marathon, back to back, triple week, multiple weekends, whatever's going on at the moment.
What an effort.
Tune in to hear Ian's story on that one. That'd be a good one.
Staying sub 4 hours on all of them. Let's go.
Exactly.
Yeah, pressure.
All right. Thank you very much, guys.
See you later.